So I'm going to talk to you this morning about something called FOMO. Can you say that with me? FOMO. Now, anybody under 30 will probably know what that is. If you're over 50, you might be thinking, what on earth is that? Maybe you've heard somebody in your family around the dinner table say it and you thought, I don't know what that is and I just won't ask because it'll make me look old and I don't know what it means. So maybe you have heard it. Maybe Pastor Fred, maybe you're up. No, Betty's shaking his head. No, all right. So FOMO is defined as fear of missing out. Fear of missing out. And it's defined as this in the dictionary: a pervasive apprehension that others might be having a rewarding experience from which you're absent. Have you ever had that feeling? A desire to stay continually connected with what others are doing. And this is, I suppose, a relatively new thing, and it's now actually being investigated by psychologists as an actual psychological condition that you can have fear of missing out. You can have FOMO as a psychological condition, and that's really because of the dawn of social media. This really wasn't so much a thing when I was growing up or maybe when you were growing up, but now with kids growing up and in the world that we live in, this is now a very real thing that lots of people experience. It's a marketing dream, fear of missing out. Marketers, when they worked out that this was a thing, must have just rubbed their hands together and gone, here is all the money, I'm going to buy my third house, this is great. Because they now use this fear of missing out to sell stuff to people and to keep us in a constant state of engagement and this awareness of where everybody else is and where you are. Because social media was originally invented to help connect people who already knew each other. That's why Facebook was first invented, because there were people at different university campuses and they wanted to stay in contact with each other. But now you can follow the minutiae of somebody across the other side of the planet who you're never going to meet, who doesn't even know you exist, but you know how they like to poach their eggs for breakfast, and you know that they use Himalayan salt, or you know what products they use to get their hair looking that way, or you know the different things that they have in their house or how they have their car, and you're intimately involved in the detail of somebody's life who you're never ever going to meet. And we now have this heightened sense of awareness of what's going on for other people. Have you ever heard this phrase, pictures or it didn't happen? Have you heard that phrase where, you're having this amazing experience and somebody says, take a picture and post it, or it's like it never happened? Nobody until 15 years ago even said that phrase. When you went on a holiday, nobody said, well, show me the pictures or I don't believe that you went on holiday. Do you remember when you went on holiday and you took a camera? Do you remember that? And you had to buy film, overpriced film at the airport, and then you'd take all these pictures and then you'd have to take it out carefully. And if you got that bit wrong, then you stuffed up your entire holiday's worth of pictures. And then you used to take it to the chemist. Do you remember that? And you put it in, and then you had to wait 2 weeks. And then you got your pictures back. And what you learnt from your pictures was how terrible you were at photography, because you just got your finger in front of the camera. And if you were really good, you would do a selfie. But that was a total gamble because you couldn't see anything. And so, you had, foreheads and upwards and nothing else. And that's what life was like, wasn't it? We didn't have this instant thing. You can live other people's holidays now, can't you? As we're all living Pastor Mark and Nina's London adventure, we're all seeing where they've been and what they're going. And it's really exciting. And we like that. But it can create in us this sense of, I'm not in London. I'm not seeing the London Eye. I'm not having this amazing experience. And it's because we're aware of other people now and what they're doing. And we're aware that actually we're missing out. That's not happening for us. And I think this kind of fear of missing out, I think it can creep into lots of different areas of our lives. I think it can come personally when you see the different milestones that people go through, maybe getting engaged or married or having children or, the first grandchild, that kind of thing. I think we can have it in our financial lives when we see perhaps the materialistic trappings of what other people have in their life, and then we're just aware that, we've had the same car for however many years and it still works, but, when somebody else gets that nice new car and we see it, it kind of creates that fear of missing out in us. We can look at other people's marriages, the the things that are shown on social media and the face that is presented and feel like, well, maybe that's not how our marriage is and we wish it was. In our family, in our work. I think even to some extent in church, we can have this sense of missing out, this fear of missing out when we see other people getting their breakthrough, when we see other people having a miracle, when we see other people's family members coming to Jesus, and we rejoice with them, but then we're very acutely aware that we're still waiting and we're still, praying for our family members. And there can be this sense of, they're getting their breakthrough, but we're still waiting for ours. And I think in our world where things are so carefully curated, the social media images that people put forward, they think about, they're looking for good filters, and you're getting the best angle, and you take 50 pictures and then delete it. I'm training Neil to be a good Instagram husband. So the minute he just takes one picture, and we've all got double chins on it, and so he's having to train him, no, you need to take 50 from all the different angles. And he's resisting training because he's a sensible human. And so that's going well. But we can so carefully present our image that we want to the world. All of the books that we read, the Christian books, often are about the end product, the finished story, the breakthrough that happens. We get the end of the story before we write the book. But for lots of us, we're all in the middle of that. We're in the struggle. And it's the boring in-between bit. One of the people that I follow on social media is a guy called John Acuff, and he's a great writer. And he's actually, at the minute, doing this really interesting thing where he's documenting the process of how he writes his books. So he's a New York Times bestseller. And it's taking forever, which, as you would imagine with a book. But what we see is we just see the finished product and think, he's an author. He just, writes out a book. But it's taking hours and hours and hours of sorting out proposals. And it's just an interesting process that he's showing the behind the scenes, the backstage, the boring bit. And often I find myself swiping through because it's really boring, the process of writing a book. He's just writing and, talking and researching, and it's not really all that much fun. But you don't get to a New York Times bestseller without all the boring bits in the middle. And it's just interesting that often we like the shiny end, we like the big reveal, we like that moment, but it's the small and it's the boring in-between bits where it's pretty difficult for us. And if we're always expecting our miracle and our breakthrough to look shiny and to be instant and to be spectacular, then perhaps maybe there's the chance that we can all miss actually what's going on in the moment. If we're expecting it to look, spectacular and be amazing, then maybe we can be at risk of, when things aren't like that, when things are boring, when things are mundane, when things are everyday, maybe we're missing actually what's going on right in front of us because we've got this fear of missing out. But maybe the miracle's happening right now, but we're just not aware of it. We're just not got our eyes tuned into it. And that's why I wanted to look at this account in John, because it is a spectacular miracle, but there's a whole load of boring middle bit where the miracle is actually happening. And I wanted us to maybe read that today and hopefully encourage your heart that not to have this fear of missing out, not to have this sense of, I'm not where I need to be, or I'm not how I would like to be. But actually, maybe you're right where you need to be and where God has placed you. And maybe it's actually happening, but you're just not aware of it this morning. So we're going to read together in John 2, and it's going to come up on the screen. It's a pretty well-known miracle. It's Jesus' first, and it's where he turns the water into wine. Let's read together. So it says this in John chapter 2. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee, and Jesus, his mother, was there. And Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Now, if I said to my mum, when she asked me a question, "Woman, why do you involve me?" that would not go down very well. I'd probably get a clip round the ear if I was at home. But at that time, saying woman was like a term of endearment. So teenagers, that's not an excuse for you to chat back to your mums. Jesus is actually being very nice there. So just because I read it, I was like, oh, that's a bit harsh. But it's not. He's being nice. So Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons, which is about 115 liters. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. And then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." And they did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everybody brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you saved the best till now." This, the first of his miraculous signs, Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. We're going to start this morning by just very quickly talking about faith. First thing, as the antidote of fear of missing out, is faith. And I love this expression of faith from Mary, because Mary says to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And I love that. I love that phrase, because there's so much expectation in who Jesus is wrapped up in that one little sentence. Because she's seen the problem, which is that they've run out of wine, because we went to 2 weddings yesterday, and it wasn't like a day wedding. They had weddings that lasted usually a whole week. So it was a big deal, and running out of wine was a really big deal. And so Mary sees a problem and goes to Jesus and says, "Listen, this is the problem." And then he says, "Oh, it's not my time yet." And then somehow she knows, because of who Jesus is, that he's able to do something and he's willing to do something. And so she says to the servants, "Listen, just whatever he tells you to do, do it." And I love that. I love the faith that's wrapped up in that statement, that it's not like perhaps if Jesus says something, have a think about it, take it under advisement, go and talk to somebody else, and then maybe think about it, possibly, maybe try and do what he says. It's just really direct. Do whatever he tells you to do. And we don't really see too much the other faith of anybody else in the story. We don't have an account of whether the servants had faith, or whether the bridegroom had faith, or whether the master of the ceremony had faith. But we do have this statement of faith from Mary in this moment. And I love the fact that it's her that says that. And it's this expectation that, listen, when Jesus is in the room, literally anything can happen. And so ask him and do what he tells you to do. And so maybe this morning, when you think about your circumstances, where you think about the things that aren't quite how you'd want them to be, maybe the question that you can ponder this week is, have you done what he told you to do? Have you done that? Where in your life and my life do we need to reassess and refocus upon the character and goodness of Jesus and express or act on that faith? Sometimes when we get in the middle of a circumstance, it's really easy just to look at everything that's going on and to miss actually that we're serving Jesus, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Like Jason said this morning, good through and through. And this morning, let me encourage you. Perhaps you've been operating in fear. Perhaps you've been operating in this sense of lack. Maybe this morning, choose to operate in faith. And choose to say, listen, I'm going to do whatever Jesus tells me to do. I'm going to do what it is that he told me to do, and express some faith this morning in who Jesus is. The second thing that I think is going to help us in our circumstances where there's that sense of missing out, there's the fear of comparison, there's the sense of, listen, it's all going all right for them, but it's not going all right for me. First thing is faith. The second thing is obedience. And that's not glamorous or fun or, showy, but it is so critical to our Christian walk. These servants have a choice. So Jesus comes to them. Mary says, she says to the servants, do whatever he tells you to do. And then Jesus comes to the servants and says, fill the jars with water. That's the instruction. And there's a choice in this moment. Are they going to do what Jesus has told them to do? He's told them to fill the jars with water. That's a pretty simple instruction, but it's really quite unclear what, if any, authority Jesus has in this circumstance. We don't know why he's been invited to this wedding. We don't know if he has any standing yet in the society, in the group that he's in. But he gives an instruction, and these servants have a choice. Are they going to be obedient to what it is that they've been asked to do? And I think for lots of us, particularly in long-term miracle situations where we're waiting a long time for things, where we've been praying for that family member for a long time, where it's long-term sickness, when it's long-term things that we're believing and praying for, I think this becomes even more key. Because obedience is never fun and easy, I don't think. I think it always costs us something because it's putting to death what we want to do and doing what Jesus has asked us to do. But I think even more so when it's the long term, because being obedient long term is really difficult because it's just day in, day out, ordinary choices to actually, will we do what Jesus has told us to do? Will we still believe for that healing even though we haven't seen it yet? Will we still be faithful and pray for our unsafe family members, even though we've not seen any inkling that it's doing anything? And we've been there, we've prayed for family members and prayed out of obedience, not always in faith, but prayed out of obedience, and then seeing God do something that is amazing and a miracle. But it took some obedience. When we're coming to building something of worth, it takes a lot of steps of obedience. When we're talking about building the kingdom of God and, building Emerge Church now in 3 locations, just takes a whole load of obedience from all of us just to show up and just to do some stuff and to do what the last thing is that we were told to do. And often in my life, when I feel like I'm not able to hear Jesus, have you ever had that where you're asking God something and it just feels like he's silent and, you can't hear him very well? Sometimes for me, the problem has been is that I've just not been obedient to the last thing that he told me to do, which is so inconvenient because you want to hear something nice and fresh. And normally what you hear is just utter silence or, what was the last thing that I told you to do, Julie? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've not done that. Okay, that's what I need to do. And so maybe in your life, maybe in your circumstance, maybe in the thing that you find yourself comparing and having a fear of missing out, maybe it's obedience that you need to walk in. Maybe you just need to do the last thing that Jesus told you to do. If he's not said anything different, well then keep doing that last thing that he told you to do. If you've not heard something new, just do the last thing that he told you to do and be obedient to it. So maybe a question to think about this week in your own time is, am I following the last instruction that Jesus gave to me? Where in my life do I need to operate in obedience? Is it in my prayer life? Is it in devotions? Is it in talking to that person in work? Is it in, the lifestyle changes that Jesus has asked me to make? Where is it that obedience needs to come? Because that's just as much part of making a miracle happen as the flashy things that we all think it is. It's just as much in obedience. So the first thing is faith. The second thing is obedience. The third thing is movement. Can you say that with me? Movement. And I love this. If we read it. So Jesus has said to the servants, fill the jars with water. And then this just innocuous little line. So they filled them to the brim. Just a nice little throwaway. So they filled them to the brim. These servants, they're acting on Mary's faith. She said, do whatever he tells you to do. So they're not particularly acting on their own faith. They're acting in obedience. But then their obedience causes some movement to happen. There has to be something that actually happens. It needed something to happen, and they've got something to do. They have to actually fill up the water jars. They have to do something. And because I love you, I researched about how long it would take with an average tap flow in Australia to fill up 115 litres, which it would take around an hour to fill up the 6 jars. So even if we just turned a tap on, if you've got good tap flow, which I now know all about good tap flow and bad tap flow, so I'm checking out my own house for the good tap flow rate and all things like that. So if we got the big stone water jars underneath a tap and we turned it on with the average water flow, it would take about an hour to fill up the 6 jars. Which, if you put yourself in the story. Jesus has said, fill them up to the brim. And so the servants fill them to the brim. And it would take an hour if they just turned a tap on. But we know that they didn't have taps and plumbing like we do. And so what it would actually mean for the servants is they'd have to have buckets or some sort of water carrying device. And there'd probably be a couple or a few of these servants. And they'd have to walk to wherever the well was. So assuming that there was a well in the village where they were. Now maybe it was really fortuitous and their house was right next to where the well was. But maybe not. Maybe it was on the other side of the village. And so they've got to go and they've got to, with their buckets, they've got to lower it into the well. They've got to draw the water up. They've got to pick it up and then slosh it all the way back to the house, pour it into a water jar, and then go and do it again. Walk, having a good chit-chat all the way. Well, that's what I would have done. I would have had a chit-chat. Put it into the well, draw it up, get it on your shoulder, carry it back all the way, tip it out. Pick it up all the way, draw it down into the well, draw it back up, carry it, splishy splashy, all the way back, and pour it in. And over and over and over and over again. And I love the fact that the Bible tells us that they filled it to the brim. That they didn't just do the adequate amount that was passable. They didn't just fill it, but they filled it to the brim. And they kept doing something. There was movement involved. There was faith from Mary. There was obedience on the servants' parts. And then there was movement that needed the miracle to happen. And I love the fact that Jesus chose it to work this way. Because he's Jesus. So he can do whatever he wants to do in this moment. But he doesn't do it the way that maybe we would, which is where if I was going to do this miracle, which is a good job I'm not, but if I was going to do this miracle, I'd just say, wine. And wine would appear everywhere. Maybe in nice jugs on the tables. Or maybe if they're holding their goblets, it would just, magically fill up. And then you drink it and then it just keeps filling it up. I think that would be a cool way to do it. Or, it could happen literally any way that Jesus could have chosen this miracle to work. And yet he chooses to work this miracle through people and through obedience and through a lot of hard work. Through lots of movement, through toing and froing and walking and drawing out and tired muscles and talking and pouring it in and drawing it up. Lots and lots of movement and not glamorous stuff either. There's no cheer squad for this little group of servants because they're literally just doing their job. This is what they're paid to do. There's nobody there going, guys, you're doing such a great job. We're just so proud of you. Keep going. You're just carrying that water bucket like an absolute legend. Oh, well done. You just got the most amount of water. You are incredible. Come on, let's go back. Let's pour it up. That was just the best pouring I've ever seen. Thank you so much for your service. Well done. Keep going. Go on, let's see if we can go quicker. No one's doing that because they're servants and they're just doing what it is that they're on the planet to do at this moment in time. It's just boring, mundane, everyday movement, to, fro, back and fro. Just lots of movement. No cheer squad for them. But they had movement, and that was part of the miracle. Very boring, very mundane, nobody cheering them on. But their movement meant that there was a miracle on the way. And I wonder if they knew in that moment that that was what was happening. And I don't think that they did, because for me, it very rarely feels like that, does it? When you're doing repetitive things, day in, day out, turning up to church, week in, week out, coming on your server team, week in, week out, going to life group, week in, week out, praying for that person, day in, day out, loving on your work colleague, week in, week out. That doesn't feel like, there's no angels behind you, there's no smoke machine, there's no soft music in the background with a keys player. You don't just say as you're about to talk to the person in your office, if the keys player could just come up please, and then they start playing and then you start that conversation. There's none of that, because it's just ordinary movement, toing, froing, muscles aching, wet feet, splashing, chatting with the people around you. And I love that. I love that that's how Jesus chose this miracle to be that way. Because it gives us hope for when things look really, really ordinary, that actually perhaps you're right there in the middle of your miracle, but it just doesn't look like you thought it should. Looks like hard work, looks like showing up, looks like going to life group when you'd rather sleep on the sofa after your tea. But actually you know that, listen, just pull a comb through your hair, put some shoes on, and go and be with people. Go and involve your life with other people. Go and pray for other people. Go and be vulnerable with people. That's what that is. It's doing, picking it up, getting splashy feet, walking. No one's like, cheering you on. No one's giving you a big phone call going, well done, you made it to life group this week. You're a champion. Because it's just in, out, in, out. If you want to see this in perfect action, go to Murrayfield at 8 o'clock in the morning. Because it's just repetitive, moving stage panels, doing this, doing the other, literally taking a cinema and transforming it into a church. Now, they have got a cheer squad. Pastor Joe is there going, you are doing an awesome job. Like, well done, keep going. But it's the same. It's the same for us here at Warner. It's the same at Redcliffe. Week in, week out, people show up, come early, unlock the doors, turn the lights on, get the tea and coffee ready, practice their instruments, do the words. All these things that happen, we're right in the middle of a miracle, but it just looks like ordinary movement. Ordinary movement. But it's miracle motion that's happening. First thing, faith. Second thing, obedience. Third thing, movement. Fourth thing is opportunity. We get to the crunch moment in this story, which is when Jesus tells somebody, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. Now there's a really big choice here. We're actually going to do it. So we've done all this work. We've got wet feet. We're being all splashy. It's filled to the brim. It's great. And now Jesus says the crucial bit, which is draw it out and take it over. Now, if this were a group of people, I would be volunteering you to go and do this bit. Because this is the really risky bit now. This is the bit where it actually has to happen. And I wonder, because we're not told in this story, but I wonder, when does the water turn into wine? Because it's not told us now that it's wine in the jars. And knowing Jesus and knowing how Jesus works in our life, I kind of think it was probably at the absolute last moment. Is it just me that feels that Jesus works like that, or is it you as well? Yes, okay, good. It's not just me. I'm not just a naughty child that Jesus is testing. But it's one of those things that I think, as the person, whoever it was that had to draw it out, maybe it's still water at that point, and he's thinking, it's still water. But then they've got to put the whole thing into action in this one movement. They've got to have faith, they've got to have obedience, they've got to have movement, and they've got to walk it over to the master of the banquet. And I wonder if it's all still water, and he's thinking, it's still water. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to go and give a cup of water to the master. This is not going to go well. And it's still water. And I wonder if as he hands it over, it's maybe still water, because that's how it feels like. And maybe it was just at the last moment, as the master of the banquet tipped it up, that's when it turned into wine, because that's how it feels like for me in my life, and maybe for you in yours. But at that point, it's the drawing it out, and it's the taking it over. It's that last step, that last opportunity that comes. And we can have faith, and we can have obedience, and we can have movement. But if when it comes to the crunch point, we don't have it in us to draw it out and take it over, we're going to miss it. And for you and me in our life, where is it where it's that last little bit where we've got to draw something out and take it over? Maybe talking to that person in work. What are you doing when you're taking that opportunity? You're drawing out of the well that God has put inside of you. You're drawing it out and you're taking it over. And that's the crunch moment. And let me tell you, that's always going to feel scary. That's always going to feel, oh my goodness, I'm so out on a limb here. But that's the opportunity. That's the crucial bit that comes. That's the moment of risk. for all of us involved. And there's a choice there. Do we follow through with what we've been asked to do, or do we sit back down? Are we going to, in our life, draw out what God has been preparing in us with all the movement, with all that's been happening? Are we going to take that moment and draw it out and walk it over? Or are we going to bottle it in that moment and sit down and lose what could have been? And I want you to think about where in your life and my life is Jesus giving us the opportunity. Where is that opportunity to draw it out and walk it over? Because it's always going to feel risky. Always. But that's the crunch point. As the servant takes the opportunity and he takes it to the master of the banquet. And then I love this little bit at the end. I wonder if the band could join me up. That the master of the banquet brings the bridegroom over and gives him the wine. And then this interesting little conversation happens where they find out that it's actually the best wine. And I love the dynamic around this, because actually this whole miracle is for the bridegroom and the bride, but particularly for the bridegroom. Because wine was a symbol of joy in the times where this story is taking place. To have wine was a symbol of joy. And it was the bridegroom's responsibility to sort out wine for the wedding. You know how when a wedding's happening, normally the girl sorts out, flowers and hair and look and feel and invitations and colours and all that kind of stuff. And you just say to the groom, just sort yourself out, like get a nice suit, make sure your friends look half decent and turn up at this time. Well, that's kind of what was going on in this kind of area. The job for the bridegroom was prepare the house and sort the wine out. Those were your two things that you had to do: prepare the place and sort the wine out. And we don't know how he went with preparing the place, but we do know that somewhere along the line he messed this up because he's run out of wine. And for us, we think, well, that's maybe bad, but, if this was, not that any of us would do this, but, you could just run down to the bottle-o and, sort it out. But that wasn't the case. They couldn't just sort this out. This was massive, massive social faux pas. Huge embarrassment. Huge. This is what this couple would be remembered for in their village forever. They would be known as the couple who had a run out of joy in their wedding, who didn't even have enough joy to sustain just the wedding celebration. It would have been so embarrassing, the thing that everybody would have talked about. And in this moment, it's totally sorted out by Jesus. But I love the fact that it's Mary that instigates this whole thing. And I just wonder, is it because Mary's got this heart of compassion, that she knows what it's like to be the couple that's talked about, that she knows what it's like to be the one that's talked about in the village, the subject of ridicule and shame and whispers and sideways glances? And maybe in this moment, she knows the embarrassment that this is going to cause this couple, and she expresses faith in the one person in the room who can actually do something about it, which is Jesus. And I love even more that just the abundance that happens in this moment. So yes, they get their wine sorted out. Yes, their problem is sorted. It's maybe an unusual story that's told. Well, they served the best wine, like the best wine came out. But most commentators think it was an unusually ridiculous amount of wine for this point. That there was so much wine that there's no way that they even could have drunk it through the whole wedding, the rest of the wedding. And so most commentators think that actually what happened in this moment was that Jesus was setting up this family financially. So yes, he takes away their embarrassment. Yes, he brings this miracle where there's no way that they could have sorted it for themselves. But actually, out of the abundance and the kindness of God for this family, they're set up financially. They've got a source and a well within them that they can sell and that's going to help them financially. And I just think that just sounds like Jesus, doesn't it? That he comes to the moment where it could be absolute shame and embarrassment, and everybody looking and thinking, what are this couple even doing? And yet he sorts out their issue. He brings the breakthrough. He brings the miracle. And there's so much abundance that it helps set them up. That sounds like my King. That sounds like my Jesus. That's what he did for me when he found me. He sorted out my sin and my embarrassment and the stuff that I could never have sorted out myself. He sorted that out, but he poured out as well into my life abundance. So much abundance. More than I could contain in my own life, so that I can actually give it out and I can actually use it to bless other people. And I wonder this morning, as we come to a close, where is it that you need to be operating in faith rather than fear? Instead of having a fear of missing out and a fear of, what could be and how things should be, maybe this morning you're being challenged to walk in faith, to express faith in the character of Jesus, that actually he's the one who's able to sort it, just to do whatever he tells you to do. Maybe you need to operate in some obedience this morning or this week and do the last thing that he told you to do, to keep on keeping on, to not grow weary in doing good. Maybe you need to add some movement. Maybe for you, the movement has stopped somewhere along the line. Maybe your legs have grown a little bit tired. Maybe your feet are a little bit too wet. Maybe you're feeling discouraged because it feels like no one's cheering you on. But let me encourage you this morning. Keep the movement going. Keep the movement going in that miracle scenario. Keep it going. Because the cloud of witnesses in heaven are cheering you on. You may have nobody on earth that you feel like is in your corner and is cheering you. But let me tell you, Jesus himself is cheering you on. The Holy Spirit is there to encourage your heart, to say, listen, you're doing good. Keep going. And lastly, don't lose that opportunity. Don't miss it when it comes to the crunch moment. Don't bottle out. Don't sit down, but draw it out of yourself. The well that God has put inside of you, draw it out and take it over to people who really need it.